Great. Okay, so we're going to jump in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, How to Deploy a Sustainable ICT Strategy in the Public Sector. This session is in collaboration with KCS Procurement Services. It's a framework which currently supports sustainable procurement. The link to where you can find access to that will be in the feed on your right. My name is Steve Haskew. I'm your host today. I'm also the Director of Sustainability at Circular Computing. Supported by Ollie and Nathan in the back end from Team Circular, so thanks there, guys. And of course, thank you to all of you for making the time to attend today. There are many stakeholders from the public sector, including teams from IT, procurement, sustainability and finance, and hopefully there'll be something in here for everybody. In this webinar, we'll be looking into the journey of how two public sector organisations implemented sustainability into their IT procurement, namely Kent County Council and the East of England Ambulance Service, NHS Trust. This session will be roughly 40 minutes or so, with a 10-minute Q&A at the end. You'll be able to send questions to today's guests at any time during the webinar via the questions tab, and I would really encourage you to do so, and we'll address as many of these as we can. We'll be taking some polls during the session as well to gauge the audience's position on sustainability. They're anonymous. I would really encourage you to get involved. It will give everybody who's in this session a chance to see how they rank perhaps with regards to sustainability themes with the total audience, and those will be distributed after the event. So now then, I am absolutely delighted and honoured to introduce our guest today, Sam Lain-Rose, who's a digital lead, digital inclusion and capability at Kent County Council, and Neil Godfrey, Deputy CIO at East of England Ambulance Service, NHS Trust. Starting with you then, Sam, could you give us a quick introduction as to who you are, what you do, and where Kent are perhaps in the sustainability journey?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So my name is Sam Lain-Rose. I'm the digital lead and I look after inclusion and capability as part of the financial hardship programme within Kent County Council. It was set up, the team was set up in February 2021 using one-off government grants to support digital poverty and digital exclusion within the county as a result of COVID. So where we are, we're at the moment developing a load of projects and schemes that will support people in the community to be digitally included. Part of that journey is also providing them the hardware and access to do that, and also looking at other ways of how we can make it sustainable, not just in terms of environmentally sustainable, but the project itself. So working with partners to do that as well. So we're looking at a hardware recycle scheme as well. So that's a bit about me.
Thanks, Sam. And yourself, Neil, could you give yourself an introduction and what the ambulance service is doing in this field?
Yeah, for sure. So good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Godfrey, and my day job is to run all of the East of England Ambulance Services IT systems and infrastructure. So that's a mixture of clinical systems and like standard IT systems that support our back office functions. We're one of 10 ambulance trusts in England, and it's because of geography, really. So the geography that I cover is effectively from Bedfordshire over to Norfolk, down through Suffolk, back across through Essex, which covers around 6 million people. So that's the kind of scope and reach of our organisation and our services. We have, as an organisation, and as many NHS organisations are trying to do, is to really drive our sustainability strategy. So it's one of the 4 pillars in terms of our goals as an organisation. So it's driven from the top of the organisation, and I can cover some details as to how we brought some of that to life from an IT perspective.
Brilliant, thank you so much. What I would like to question first, if that's okay, is business as usual, say a few years ago, didn't really include sustainability as a core theme. And in getting to know you guys and the businesses that you operate within, I sense that things have changed and will never turn back to the way that they are. How did you and the business overcome, let's say, a fear or an uncertainty or a doubt with sustainable procurement in what you currently do? Hopefully that question makes sense. But Neil?
Yeah, so I think I kind of alluded to it. So it starts from the top. So, our chief exec, when set out the kind of 5-year strategic plan for the trust, made very clear that sustainability was one of our 4 sort of key pillars. And I think that helps because it kind of drives that message through the organisation. We've had some challenges with supply chain over the last 12 to 18 months, I would say. That has accelerated in a good way our sustainable strategy, because traditional routes for getting IT equipment were proving quite difficult. So we had to look at various alternatives. And again, I can talk a bit more about that. But our other kind of key thing is we used a lot of paper in the NHS. And one of the key things we're trying to do is to get to a zero paper operational kind of capability, which is challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Sam, from your end, in terms of scoping out the program that you're leading and the support from the business, can you just give an indication as to how that came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have so in terms of the kind of why we went sustainable in terms of the project, when I joined, we had to come up with a kind of key principles for our projects and theme and schemes and also support those other partners and stakeholders that were accessing the funding to do the same thing. And one of the key themes was sustainability, and that came from the top. It came from the leader in terms of strategic statements that had been put out before, but also the new emerging one that County Council is doing at the moment. So sustainability is really core to it, and as Neil alluded to, supply chain for new laptops was difficult. It was blocked, and we can access those quickly, and because of the one-off funding that we had, and there's a time limitedness to that funding, we were looking at other options, and obviously this kind of fit this model of kind of using remanufactured or refurbished laptops was the better model. It provided that value for money from a public sector point of view, and actually it in some cases it's more superior than buying new. So in terms of the way that it's been remanufactured, so it can be better than new sometimes. So that's kind of where we came from. In terms of business as usual, there's a strong push now, I've seen internally, but as well as external partners in terms of districts and borough councils as well, to look at how are they refreshing their equipment, and how does that work, and how can that benefit those that are digitally excluded. So that is something that I think has come across since the pandemic, and obviously other kind of factors outside of our own control, with the supply chain and everything else that's going on, COP 26 and things like that.
I think working with you, Sam, has been interesting to see the intent as laid out in your scope, and then actually how you're delivering on that. So for those in the audience, what Kent Digital are doing, if I'm quoting out of tune here, Sam, put me right, please, is there's a take back scheme that comes into a hub from which then you can create value that will then put funds into a feeder that allows you to go and then procure product to distribute back into society, creating a kind of a circular environment, if you like, which helps eliminate that waste. I think I'm right in saying that.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment. Obviously, what we've done so far is provide that access to those that are digitally excluded now, that definitely need that support. So that in first kind of injection of devices, and we chose to use remanufactured products to do that, using the KCS procurement framework. And then I think what we are doing is doing that circular kind of recycle scheme that will allow us to get that value, and also work with partners, because at county council level, and especially for those that are 2 tiers, we have to work with our partners at district level, including parish and town councils as well, and where we can get that value, where they've got loads of equipment that they're getting rid of. Some local authorities in the past have tried to donate to schools, and schools don't want it because it doesn't meet their requirements, so it ends up being kind of wasted stock at the end of their shelf life. And 3 years is not really for everyday use in terms of the consumer, isn't that long of a time, and it can still have some value out of it. So that's why we've done that model, and working with the districts is kind of looking at the model for them, what's best for them in terms of, you know, if they get value out of the stock they've provided, how does that get fed back into that district, and that kind of flexible approach, especially for a council kind of for an area, and it's quite a large area in Kent as well. We've got 12 districts across the piece, and lots of other partners. So for us, it's about how do we provide that flexibility in the model to enable that to happen as effectively as possible.
I think it's quite inspiring to see a council as big as Kent sort of leading from the front. You know, normally it's quite rigid. Procurement, fulfillment's quite rigid, and I think what's being demonstrated is sustainability is involved in the story, of course, but Kent, in building out this digital strategy for closing the divide, provides an element of flexibility so that you can almost lay the road out as the program kind of picks up speed. So that's been really exciting to see. And from your side, Neil, are there other things in the IT pond other than the hardware end that you're looking at? Dirty data, cloud, on-prem, that sort of stuff. Are there other things that are part of your mix that you could share experiences of?
Yes, absolutely. Apologies, I have actually got COVID at the moment. I should explain. So I'm doing my best. So please bear with me. Yeah. So when I joined the service, it was very much everything was run on premise, or predominantly run on premise, and some of that is regulatory. So some of our command and control systems that we use from a 999 provision perspective have to be on-prem. But there's an awful lot of stuff that we have that doesn't. And we're going through a journey of assessing each part of our ecosystem and establishing where's the best place to host and manage from a sustainability cost benefit perspective. And we've probably now got about 20% of our systems that are now cloud hosted. And we think that the end result for us will be around 80% of our systems have the potential to be cloud hosted, and we'll kind of continue through that journey over the next few years. I think it's fair to say that every pound of NHS money spent is it gets a lot of scrutiny, particularly any pound you don't spend in the back of an ambulance service gets a lot of scrutiny. So you know, what we've been able to demonstrate through that reuse specifically is how to get more for our budget and for our money over the last 12 months. It's made us a significant improvement in our kind of financial position from an IT perspective by adopting a reuse first strategy. Again, when I joined, a new starter would get a brand new set of equipment out of the box, and now we move through our refurbishment and recycling process internally. We allocate equipment based on a role that an individual is taking, and you know, the equipment is fit for use. It may be new, it may be refurbished, it may be remanufactured, but that's our strategy now.
I think that's the right way. Just for everybody in the chat, there's a button on the right hand side of the screen which says poll. If you could jump in there and add your thinking in there, that'd be great. In terms of the what you've just said, Neil, I think that we're hearing more and more of this kind of way of thinking. You know, profiling the user, getting equipment that is fit for the user's a job role, which might not include remanufactured or refurbished. They might need, you know, to do some deep data work and, you know, be an architecture that, quite frankly, needs as much power as the world could muster. But we do actually see clients thinking about not just the budget, because that is important, obviously, and the manufacturers currently, the original manufacturers have the ability to sort of turn the dial up and down in various geographies around the world, so they can manipulate those numbers. but just kind of pausing for breath and saying, we don't actually need the modern technology, because product that's 3 years old, as long as it can do the job at hand, it is fit enough. And I think that was the conversation that we had when we first engaged. You might remember the build up to you becoming clients of ours. I don't want to sort of oversell circular computing, but there was a process involved that included sort of a pre-market engagement, taking some product in, testing that product. Do you think that is an important part of moving from traditional ways of doing things to more modern ways of thinking?
It is, and we specifically chose some target stakeholders and swapped out their laptops. So I've got a remanufactured laptop, for example. I had a very high spec all singing, all dancing device beforehand. But I've been running this now for over 6 months. It does exactly what I need it to do. And the stakeholders that we picked across the organisation at various levels, in various roles, we went through the same exercise with, to demonstrate that from a day-to-day operational perspective, there is no challenges with use of remanufactured technology. And we've kind of demonstrated and proven that.
And was there any, and speak openly, please, was there any pushback and feedback about perception? I don't want to do it this way, it's got to be that way. How did you overcome those things?
Yeah, we had, some pushback. People, particularly more senior go in the organisation, want the latest and greatest. And it's really just, I think the real benefits we get in terms of the data points, in terms of the amount of CO2 that we save, the zero landfill strategy that we've now adopted as an organisation, the trees that have been planted. And once people see the specifics behind what we're doing, and they actually start using the devices in anger and realise, actually, this is all good stuff, it really does break down those barriers.
Yeah. And from your side, Sam, what's been the uptake from the powers up above in terms of the decisions you've made in using a not new solution? How have they felt about that, do you think?
They've been very supportive. I think everyone at KCC, and particularly those that are in the corporate management team, including cabinet members, in terms of the councillors themselves, I think they're quite impressed with the fact that the devices work as well as new. They are packaged as though they are new, but and everything that goes with that, and that kind of that. It's that mindset, I think, and because we're not providing it to staff necessarily, we're providing it to residents of Kent. There is a perception of, some people have a perception of, oh, actually, I only want new, and that's it. And I think we have, as society, become very, very very much, let's dispose of the stuff that's not quite new and get a new one in. And actually, we've had some raving kind of comments from customers that we've supported through the schemes that we've got around the laptops and how they're performing, and that they wouldn't have known that they were remanufactured had we not told them. That I think from that perspective, I think hopefully that will then do a channel shift, not just from a local authority point of view and others, but actually from a consumer point of view, that they don't necessarily need to buy new. They don't have to pop down to Currys and get the latest model. Actually, they can get as much use out of a remanufactured or a refurbished laptop if they wanted to, which might save them some money as well.
That's good. I think what I'm hearing from both yourself and from Neil, Sam, is there seems to be a shift in thinking as to what value looks like. So obviously there's a financial value, but we're actually talking about redefining value, both internal stakeholders and externally. And I think that's a really important thing, because hopefully it will bleed into other areas of the organisation, in not just taking what's gifted up by the original manufacturers, and they have a magnificent job and a very hard job to do, by the way. Without them, obviously, we couldn't remanufacture anyway. But it's more than just the hardware. It makes people stop and question what they're doing. Providing a proper mindset towards resource management, cash being one, but obviously world resources are running precariously thin, and things, the political risk with where minerals come from is a concern that we need to be aware of. So I think being able to explore this with you has actually enabled us to learn as well, because whilst we thought as an organisation we had all of the answers, we actually didn't have all of the questions. So that wasn't possible to have all of the answers. And so I'm very grateful for you to allow me to do that. In terms of other technologies, Neil, like the ambulances themselves, what is the trust doing to look at other pillars within its remit to become more sustainable?
So we've just moved from a legacy system in our ambulances for electronic patient records, where we were using tough books, which are a ruggedized laptop, effectively, to iPads, and we've effectively stretched the use of these tough books for over 10 years. So these are Panasonic devices that we have just been through an exercise to replace with iPads, and working with Panasonic and yourselves, we're very keen, and we've got nearly 1,000 of these devices, that we get some future value out of them, not from a financial point of view, but from a usability point of view. So as we're just going through an exercise of working through how that, from a remanufacture perspective, will work for Panasonic, work for yourselves, and work for us from a zero landfill strategy perspective, because clearly we want to make sure that these devices are reused as much as possible, or the components within those devices are reused as much as possible.
I find it really interesting, Neil, that you've taken a duty of care not just to the in-use phase of your responsibility, which is clearly your primary responsibility, but also what happens after you finish using the product, where you can retain that value in society. For those in the audience that don't know, we remanufacture tough books for Panasonic at the OEM. It's a very difficult job to do. We're looking to retain that value in the downstream supply chain with them, and that's a really exciting project that we're looking forward to delivering for the trust, and maintaining some positivity with what would otherwise have been a disposal problem, which already exists, but the trust have taken a different view on it, which is exciting. Much the same way, Sam, that you and Kent are managing redundant IT, creating value, and with that value then being able to invest in other technologies to support the community.
I think it's a real challenge for most NHS organisations that I know, in terms of the disposal and kind of reuse of IT. I think any organisation that I would go to, I would suggest I could find a big cupboard or container somewhere full of stuff. And I think now is the time that we kind of open up the channels, that we can have real conversations about how we get most value collectively out of that technology. So not financial, but we want certainty that this stuff isn't going to go into a landfill site, and that's a critical thing for us. But we recognise that a lot of the stuff that is not necessarily serviceable front line for us is something that is serviceable, for someone else, and then that's important that we can enable that.
I think that's important particularly in the public sector. You have a duty of care to look after resources given to you by the taxpayer, and to make sure that those values are pushed out as long as possible beyond your first use. Just because the value you've taken your piece of value from the product, there are other people, like you say, in society that can use the product to maximize that output. So as I say, we see that with Kent and Sam, the way that you're rolling in and rolling out products, Sam. Do you have multi-stakeholder challenges, Sam? I'm interested in the adoption of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have with any project that we do, it requires a lot of stakeholders, and for us, we're working very closely and very positively with all our district councils to roll out, you know, the different schemes that we're doing, and we've got district councils that are very eager because they're coming up to their renewal process where they're going to get rid of their old devices to kind of make sure that what we've got in place works for them. There are different challenges in the sense that, you know, different district councils work differently. They have a different thought process on how they should be renewing and that's what I said, going back to what I said at the beginning, which was we've adopted a flexible approach with it. So if a district council wants to, you know, donate the devices to the scheme, but take the value out and target a separate group of people that is generally not targeted by the scheme, that's absolutely fine. We'll be able to accommodate that. So we've got a kind of a connected and holistic approach within Kent, but working very flexibly with where district councils want to do something slightly different. So that can be challenging because obviously you have to kind of come up with a way of doing that. But for us, it's kind of part and parcel of what we're doing, and it's kind of instilled, you know, as a local authority at Kent, we're very passionate about working with those partners to make sure that they're getting the value that they want, and we're getting the value that we need as well out of the whole process.
Brilliant. I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to throw into the conversation, if that's okay, because they're pretty relevant. I've got a question from Pelham Wicks, which probably is more suited to Neil, which is, how has the introduction of remanufactured laptops, been managed with your existing fleet, given that then they're probably not the total solution, Neil?
Yeah, so what started out as a kind of pilot quickly became recognition that we had a viable solution for the majority of our user profiles. But we always recognized that there would need to be a kind of, you know, a number of options available to us. So we're trying to adopt a kind of, it's not an exact science, but we're kind of going for a sort of 2/3 remanufactured to 1/3 new type position this year. And then we're going to assess that position at the end of this financial year, so effectively around this time next year. What we're doing is trying to swap things out. So as devices fail and they're not covered by warranty or they're uneconomical to repair, then we're replacing them with remanufactured devices. And that's how we're feeding them in effectively, as well as new starters. So again, based on the user persona or user profile, we're trying to say, well, this is your package when you start, which includes a remanufactured laptop.
Do you think there is a place I've just thought about this, there's a place for an education piece that could be worked together as a collaboration that it educates the user about what the trust are doing for sustainable outcomes?
Yeah, definitely. We've been thinking about branding or overlaying additional branding onto the devices to highlight and promote the fact that we're using sustainable computing. It's an interesting dilemma because on the one hand, a lot of our users wouldn't know, to be quite honest with you. It's a laptop. But there are some users that do. And I think one of the things that we have been considering is, for those users that, may prefer having new devices, if we could brand them in a way that actually they see that it's a sustainable device and it's having a positive impact on both the trust and the environment, then that's got to be a good thing.
There's something that we can do. I can talk about you offline. There's something we can do to help you there if you want.
Sure.
In terms of Kent County's corporate, Sam, you're not involved in that personally.
No, I'm not involved in that personally, but obviously I can't. Well, I am slightly involved in some of the discussions, but I'm not involved in it, in managing it day to day personally. But we've had discussions around them using the recycle scheme that we're doing. They're fully aware of that. They're fully cited on that. And as they progress through their planning on what they're doing with the equipment, and bear in mind, as a county council and a large county council, with COVID and the way that we work now, it's very much more flexible than going into the offices, and all our office spaces have gone through a kind of a refresh, and they're not. No one's got set desks anymore. They book them. So the way we're working very much after, as we come out of the pandemic, is much more flexible, and potentially using other office spaces like with our district councils, and vice versa. They can use our office spaces. So there are multiple needs that they are thinking about in terms of what does the future of our assets need to look like, and which kind of very similar to Neil in terms of which user personas need what, because there are different systems and legacy systems that we run, which then complicates that a little bit further. But ultimately, they are fully supportive of what we're doing for our Kent residents, and they want to play a part in that. So that's really positive, I think, and it's just very, very, very collegiate here at Kent. They're very, very, very happy.
I think I like the feeling of inclusion and collaboration in the supply chain, and what I can say wholeheartedly, whilst there's a bit of effort on both sides in the early part of the engagement, is in getting to know you both and what you're doing with what you're trying to achieve outside of the fact that it's just, the remanufactured laptop is what I do, but what you do is actually you make that different by living and breathing in your day job the laws or the principles, if you like, that are coming into society, that are being adopted by the businesses, and really using technology to create a more positive outcome. It's been really lovely to see. And that in the early parts of engagement, there's an element of trust involved in building the thing out. But once you get into the game, I feel like that it's sort of, it's not a dippy toe in the water environment. It's sort of, right, we've committed to sustainability. We're going to do this in terms of social inclusion. We're just going to jump in and see how we get on. And actually, the experience from our end, at least, has been actually very, very welcoming. I don't know how you feel about things.
Absolutely, I think it's been a very steep learning curve for me personally in terms of remanufacturing and the other options around, but actually it's been a very positive one where actually I can share with colleagues what we're doing in detail. The positive impact assessment that obviously you provide as part of our and we can share that with customers and our colleagues internally, and that's then sparking other conversations around how else can we do this. It's not just laptops, it's other devices as well that are digital and that we use. So that is quite exciting, I think, for us in Kent. Yeah,
I agree. And I've got another question here, actually. I've got a question again from Pelham. Is there an experience of procurements within the NHS for remanufactured laptops, as the configure to order nature for, say, LTE or 4G may mean they are not as available? And this also probably would run into a question from Charlotte Davenport. Hi, Charlotte. In the remanufactured sector, are there any materials that need to be sourced new to remanufacture the product effectively? So just to kind of tick that off, from a manufacturing end, what happens is product arrives as core, it gets disassembled, and then it goes down into our factory into different product lines, and then the sub-assemblies are tested, they come back together and they get rebuilt. And in that testing part, it might be that we need to do CTO, so we put LTE cards in, we'll update the drives to the latest SSD, more memory maybe, we might need to replace the screen or the battery. So what comes out at the other end is a device that is either CTO or as new as Neil has said. So we kind of tick that off. There's a question here from James Warner, which says, can refurbished or remanufactured keep up with technology improvements? The fact of the matter is that we are a shadow supplier, if you think of it like that. We're not cutting edge, we are sort of trailing edge. If a client's needs cannot be met by a device that's trailing edge and they need cutting edge technology, then unfortunately that need can't be met by us because we aren't designing that technology out. We're actually following behind. So in answer to that question, James, we can't give you cutting edge technology. It's just not within our remit. I've got a really good question here, probably for yourself, Neil, from Susie Ventris Field. Hi. Aside from the hardware, what advice might you give to the audience on more sustainable options for, let's say, data management?
So we've been working through our sort of data strategy over the last 2 to 3 years, and we're not there yet. But as we all know, we have to keep a lot of information for a very long time. So we're working with our cloud providers at the moment to work on a tiering solution where we can find the right place for the right data. As I said, we're not there yet. What we have built is a data lake where what we're doing is putting in data from various single systems so that we can effectively analyze that data in a more constructive basis. But in terms of the core data itself, we've got a mixture of storage, some on-prem, some in the cloud. But we want to get to a very clear strategy around our kind of where our landing zones are for all our different data types across the organisation. But as I said, we're not there yet.
Okay, hopefully that's answered the question. Thanks, Neil. I've got another question to you, Neil, if that's okay, from Jason Somerville, which says, interested to ask Neil this: what is the legislation that prevents critical systems such as CAD being cloud, assuming he's interpreted correctly? Just conscious that a number of our ambulance suppliers of critical systems are promoting cloud-based upgrades. I'm assuming the inference was upon storage of clinical and PID data rather than SAS. I'm hoping that makes sense to you.
Yes, person identifiable data, yes.
Okay.
And yeah, so it was our CAD system, and there is a legacy legislation around where you run your CAD system from. I think it's fair to say that the direction of travel for those CAD system providers is very much they see the future as being cloud hosting for those systems, and the legislation is kind of following that. Similar kind of challenge with our telephony platform, actually. We would very much like to adopt a far more cloud-based telephony platform, and the legislation is heading in the right direction, but it's not there just yet. So clearly it has to be safe operationally, it has to be extremely resilient operationally, but I think that is definitely the direction of travel. I can see, 5-10 years down the road that effectively all of our systems could and potentially should be cloud-based.
For the sake of sustainability, or for the sake of?
So it's mainly sustainability, absolutely. As I think, we run a loose count of how many server rooms, I don't call them data centers, but how many pockets of infrastructure that we have across the organisation. I think we grew from consolidation of 3 former ambulance trusts. So effectively, we've got 3 lots of everything, is the way I look at it from my simple world. So getting that down to 1 on-prem would be quite a challenge. So the better answer for us is actually to move out to a more sustainable cloud-based framework.
And then migrate the 3 to 1, so to speak.
Yeah. But virtually rather than physically.
Yeah, of course. I have a question from Jason Somerville again. Question about laptop servers to be reused, etc. Has always been a reticence in his trust to reuse or offer out to market for reuse due to the risks associated with info on hard drives and BIOS. Always seems to be a security problem, and therefore we is the only option. How do you overcome any issues? Okay, so that's a really good question. It's okay with you guys if I can answer that. Okay, ever since the dawn of laptop technology back in the 90s, the world of ITAD, which is IT asset disposal, has existed. And alongside that became a shadow industry. So as there was aggressive refreshes, so there was an ITAD service provision behind the scenes, and that provision looks firstly to sanitizing data and removing any asset tags from the device that associate that device with the former user, and that can be certificated. Where that cannot happen, then the drive or the data-bearing devices are shredded and go off for repurposing, possibly into a composite plastic for pallets and things like that. So that job already exists. There is a way of doing that off-site. There's a way of doing it on-site. So it depends what the client's agenda is with regards to, I guess, trust and making sure that those things can happen safely and securely. Clearly, in an NHS trust, data is a primary concern. But that would be the same in any organisation where, banking, for instance, or insurance, where personal data is critical to their being. So there's 250 million devices made every year globally. There's probably 200 million devices in the second-hand market every year. There's an industrious side to second-hand, which is where we sit. We don't do ones and twos. We sit in the volume part of the world because we get efficiency that way. So in answer to your question, it exists and it can be done easily.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
So just to give you a real example, so with the Panasonic Toughbooks, our trust policy is basically to shred them. So if I followed the trust policy as it was written, it would be disposal through and shred them. We challenged that, and when we looked at the devices when they came back and how they'd been used, and they didn't actually have any patient data on them at all, and they had no personal identifiable data on them. So we assessed the risk as actually very low, and we have very at a granular level gone through every device, gone down to a BIOS level, effectively reset it back to its factory standard. And then we had a big discussion on the hard drives. Do we shred them or do we do something else? And to get the most sustainable outcome, we decided to go with a different solution, and we're effectively wiping the drives and reusing them because the overall risk assessment is very low. It is a risk, but we assessed it as being low enough to be acceptable from a sustainability perspective. I don't think any NHS organisation wants to be the one that has that laptop that appears on eBay full of patient data. And I think you need to look at, the use of each device. And, when we're looking at a project like decommissioning the Toughbooks, look at it as a whole and assess the risk. I don't think it'll ever be zero risk, but I think you can go to a level where you can make the risk low enough to be acceptable to the execs to take the right action from a sustainability perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really decent answer. I am going to, unless there's anything else from yourself or Sam in the discussion, I would like to thank you both really from the bottom of my heart in support of what we're trying to achieve for better outcomes. Neil, I would really like to thank you, particularly as it's your annual holiday and you have COVID, for really jumping in and supporting us. And to yourself, Sam, for really, what you're doing in the community. It's amazing. Again, thank you all to everybody that's attended today. I'm hoping that you have found this discussion useful. There are one or two questions that I'll probably take offline from yourself, David Baird. In fact, I'll throw this one in if that's okay. What use cases have come up where remanufactured devices have not been suitable? I think it's fair to say that we aren't the total solution. And Neil has sort of qualified that in that he has 100%. He's identified possibly two-thirds of that 100% will be good enough for remanufactured devices, and the additional third won't be. So there's always occasion when the needs of the user can't be met by a remanufactured device, but I would urge you to explore it with us. By exploration, you'll figure it out for yourself. So with that, I'm going to thank you. I'm going to thank the KCS framework for allowing us to put this together with them. And Neil and Sam, thank you so much. And obviously we'll speak soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.